Goswami has taught us the way, and in his book Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and in that book he explains all the different rasas. And in his other principal book, the Ujjwal Nilmani, he speaks about Sakya Rasa in the first 2 chapters in terms of its role in Madhurya Rasa, which is what the book is principally about. And Rupa Goswami himself is thought to be in Madhurya Rasa as a handmaiden of Radha, and sometimes that is referred to as Manjari Bhava. So if we are to follow Rupa Goswami, there are 2 ways in which we can call ourselves a follower of Rupa Goswami. In one way, we follow his teachings on Shuddha Bhakti, that he's explained in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Anyavilashita Shunyam Gam Karmandiyanavritam Anukulen Krishnanam Shilanam Bhakti Rutam. And the other way in which we'll follow him, some devotees may follow him, is in terms of his own internal life in Krishna Lila in Manjari Bhava. So it could be said that this is the full sense of the term rupanuga. To follow Rupa Goswami kind of externally, in a sense, in terms of following the teachings of Shuddha Bhakti, and in the context of that, to pursue within Shuddha Bhakti same bhava as Rupa Goswami. However, if one follows Rupa Goswami in terms of pursuing Shuddha Bhakti, and at the same time pursues another bhava or rasa other than Manjari Rasa, Manjari Bhava, such a person is still rupanuga in the first sense of the term. And whenever my Guru Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada, used the word rupanuga throughout all of his writings and speaking, he only used it in that sense, in the sense of following Rupa Goswami's teaching on Shuddha Bhakti. He never used it in terms of following the particular bhava of Rupa Goswami, which he himself did not follow, as we know from his own testimony. And he considered himself a rupanuga in that sense. So it is a little bit of a narrow way of speaking about it to not acknowledge the follower of Rupa Goswami's teaching on Shuddha Bhakti as a rupanuga, at least in one sense. I'll give you a nice, interesting example. It's a book that was written several centuries ago, called, I believe, called Prego Bhakti Rasa. And it's a book written by a devotee, maybe Nyananda Thakur, who was a Gaudiya Vaishnava and a follower of Sakyarasa. The lineages of Sakyarasa in Gaudiya Vaishnavism were the first lineages. They were formed by the followers of Nityananda Prabhu. The Dwadasa Gopals, as they're called, the 12 principal cowherd friends of Krishna and Balaram in Krishna Lila that appeared in Gaur Lila as associates of Nityananda Prabhu. So you know that Nityananda Prabhu started Gaudiya Vaishnavism because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was teaching Krishna Bhakti, and Nityananda Prabhu said, I will teach Gaur Bhakti. Before the sophisticated books of the Goswamis from the Vrindavan side and from the Navadvip side of Kavi Karnapur and so forth were ever written about Chaitanya Vaishnavism and so forth, Nityananda Prabhu very boldly stood up and said, we will not chant Krishna Nam, we will chant Gaur Nam. Bhaja Gauranga, Kaha Gauranga, Laha Gauranga, Yarname, Yedana Gauranga, Bhaja Sayam Arprama. This is really the beginning of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, in a sense. And so his followers were setting up shop and initiating and so forth. And so there are some lineages stemming from that influence in Gaudiya Vaishnavism of Sakyarasa. So this Nyananda Thakur is in such a lineage, and they're followers of Sudam and Gopa in Krishna Lila. He is he has Keval Sakyarasa. Sakyarasa with no other influence, like no influence of Madhurya or like some other types of Sakyarasa. So anyway, in Nyananda Thakur's book, he explains in some detail all of what Rupa Goswami explains in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu in his chapter about Sakyarasa. He has a whole chapter about Sakyarasa, explaining all the Anubhavs and the Sthayi Bhavs, the Samchari Bhavs that are relevant to that rasa, the qualities of Krishna that are most attractive to those in Sakyarasa, the forms of the ages of Krishna, so on and so forth. It's a fairly detailed and comprehensive exposition on Sakyarasa. He did this on Vatsalya Rasa, on Shantarasa, on Dasarasa, and Madhura Rasa, very little in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, because he has a whole book, Ujjvala Nilmani, about Madhura Rasa. So, Nyananda Thakur has taken the chapter of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu on Sakyarasa, and he's explained that in some greater depth, all with deference to Rupa Goswami. With his deference to the Goswami, he means Rupa Goswami on his head. So he is, in effect, we would say, following the lead of Rupa Goswami, who has explained Shuddha Bhakti, and this is one of the options within Shuddha Bhakti, and it's a prominent option in the sense that Nityananda Prabhu brought this influence with him. After all, he's Balaram, he's Krishna's best friend, and he came with his other friends, the Dwadasa Gopals, and so on and so forth. So the Sakyarasa has a place in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and And Gaudiya Vaishnavism is all following the lead of Rupa and Sanatana Goswami and Jiva Goswami. Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, they were taught personally by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and empowered to speak about what would become Chaitanya Vaishnavism or Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So it is a little bit of a narrow interpretation. At the same time, it's a nice interpretation. Say, the full follower of Rupa Goswami is following him in both ways and so forth. But when we say that in a way that, without having that bhav, which is sometimes the case and probably the case in the instance in which you heard it, then it is it can tend to be somewhat less attractive and becoming, because it speaks more of kind of an exclusivity, and it is a veiled deprecation, if you will, of other sentiments, which is an area in which one doesn't want to go. Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj, for example, understood Prabhupada to be in Sakyarasa. He explained what the symptoms were that he saw that led him to think in that way and so forth. And it was very firmly his opinion, made that clear. And it was very beautiful in the way in which he spoke about that also. And some people heard that they complained that he's criticizing Prabhupada by saying that Prabhupada is only in Sakyarasa, which is not what he was saying, but he was saying he's in Sakyarasa. And Sridhar Maharaj heard that he had complained, some of Prabhupada's disciples, and he was stunned by that. He thought it was rather a compliment to say that he had attained Sakyarasa, and of course that was his conviction as well. And then he said, what do they think Sakyarasa is? What kind of, they think it's a bad thing? Yes. He could not fathom that. So this is a more of a spiritual assessment and Sridhar Maharaj was a very strong follower of Rupa Goswami in both senses, rupanuga in both senses of the term. Very strongly pursuing an attainer, a realizer, Manjari Bhava, and a strict follower of the Siddhanta and the Bhava, in particular Rupa Goswami. But he had a different, apparently, way of thinking about it than the person who you heard that from. And it is from a person who actually knows something by experience what is bhava. Anyone can talk about bhava. I mean, it's a little complicated, but you can learn the theory and so forth and talk about it. You can give a seminar on Manjari Bhava and so forth and say, just see, you must be a Manjari because you're wearing a sari and attending all the classes and so on and so forth. And it's not a bad thing to have a seminar on such esoteric topics, explaining the theory and so on and so forth. But to have some bhav, then without even speaking directly about the topic, one can do more for people to give them access to such higher world and our ideal than even directly talking about it. And in our lineage, those exalted devotees tend to be found, for the most part, tend to talk about it, though a little conservatively and emphasize more on things that would be closer to our, at hand, to our immediate necessity for making progress. You know me, I like to say that we have to know the goal and we have to know where we are. So I like to give the example, if you come into the shopping mall, sometimes there's a map and it says you want to go to room 108, he's up here. And there's another little sign that says, and you are here. So you need to know both things, kind of where you want to go and then you have to know where you are. So some theoretical knowledge is useful, but we should be careful not to think that by some intellectual understanding of a topic that we have gone further than intellectual understanding of it will afford us. And intellectual understanding of the topic is only as useful as it actually fuels practice that focuses on the next step ahead of us. Because if you want to walk the path and you're looking at the goal, you could fall over also and miss the next step. So it's important to have a local kind of focus on what's important for you in the immediate, but not in such a way that you have no idea what the goal is either. That will not be useful. So a little of both. And so it sounds like, I wasn't there, but it sounds like an instance in which someone doesn't have any really bhava and then makes a discussion about it turn a little bit towards the mundane. For example, here's another example. It's one thing to say, who cares for Braha? Who cares for Matsya, Kurma, Avatar? What have they ever done? Compared to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his appearance. Prabhupada Saraswati says that, but we wouldn't say that. He has some feeling for what is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We'll worship his feeling and so forth. So sometimes there's such feeling, those statements can be made. But we'll find them charming. But the way in which apparently that emphasis on Madhurya Rasa was made to you, it was not as charming and compelling and so forth. And so that speaks of rather some kind of an intellectual, maybe sleight of hand, and thinking that one has gained more access to the ideal than the intellectual understanding of the theory actually affords. And I don't mean to say that intellectual understanding of the theory is a bad thing, it's a good thing. The more we have theoretical understanding in one sense, the better equipped we are to tread the path. But still we have to tread the path. That's the point. And Baba is Sudurlabha, very, very rare. So someone can talk about it, but as they say, the English adage is, talk is cheap. And Bhava is not cheap, it's very, very sudurlabha, very rare. It has been said by Mukunda Goswami, one of the commentators on Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, that to attain the eagerness, lobha, for Rag Bhakti in general is more rare than attaining Bhava Bhakti in Vaidhi Bhakti. So we pray that we develop the eligibility, the eagerness for Rag Bhakti, and at the same time we consider ourselves as followers of Rag Bhakti, although we qualify that by, in general, considering ourselves ajata ruchi raga bhaktas, those who don't have any yet taste, but are pursuing it on the basis of attraction to someone who does, our guru, sadhus, and so forth, and also pursuing it on the basis of some theoretical understanding of, which argues that this is the best, the Raga Bhakti, and someone may also say, within that, the Manjari Bhava is the highest, so it's not a bad thing, but we should understand that without taste, it's almost an oxymoron, without taste, Raganuga, Rag means following by taste. So, so we follow one who has a taste, by attaching ourselves to such a person that we've generously called Rag Bhakta. It's just like it's generous to say Prakrita Bhakta, means materialistic devotee. Devotees aren't supposed to be materialistic, but the Bhagavatam uses this language to talk about the Kanishthadikari. He's a materialistic devotee. It's kind of generous to call him a Vaishnava, who is materialistic when the Vaishnava is transcendental to even the whole Varnashram system and so on and so forth. So, as far as which bhava to choose, therefore, he says we should be careful to choose Manjari bhava, or we won't be really a follower of Rupa Goswami and so forth. Well, we can do some, choosing in some sense. I mean, we can choose to follow the bhava of our guru, under whose influence we are, and so on and so forth. And that will generally be the course of most devotees. But still, we find some exceptions are there also. That people follow their guru very devotedly, and in more rare instances, they may develop a bhava different than that of their gurus. Whatever the entirety of the situation of Prabhupada is another discussion, but we do find that he had a different bhava than Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. In his own words, he said, my guru, Maharaj, is a gopi and I'm the cowherd. So, this is found in the book of my friend, his words in that regard. So, there are, and he was very, you can't say he was, well, he's not a follower of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. I don't think he would say that about Om Vishnupada Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. He very carefully followed the Siddhanta of Rupa Goswami. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was considered rupanuga virudha siddhanta dvantaharane. Rupanuga virudha siddhanta dvantaharane. Anyone would speak contrary to the siddhanta of Rupa Goswami, he would become virudha. He would not tolerate, he would become enraged at that if there was a deviation from the siddhanta of Rupa Goswami. It doesn't say if anyone had a different bhava than Rupa Goswami, he would become very angry at them. No. But if we have a different siddhanta for Rupa Goswami, then we're not a Rupanuga. If we have the same siddhanta and the same bhava, then we consider ourselves very fortunate, and we could say we're Rupanuga in both senses, and we hope that many people will become like that. That would be very nice. But we find that there is, within Gaudiya Vaishnava, there are devotees who develop attraction for other bhavas. So we don't have it. If we don't have any bhava, then we have guru bhava. Attraction to our guru, we have guru bhakti, we'll be dedicated to our guru, whatever is my guru's bhava, I'll follow that. But it may come to pass, even possible, that you will develop a different bhava. Now, we talked about this the other day, how it comes and so forth, so I won't repeat myself, but the possibility is there, and we see examples, a number of examples in the Sampradaya. But what I want to say here is that how will you know? You can make a kind of a intellectual choice like the person was suggesting, or you could make the choice, just let me follow my guru, and we'll stick with that. And whatever comes of that, then I'll be happy. This seems to be a very good strategy, and it has been my strategy, and it's not just a preaching strategy. So I'll tell you a short story to help put this in perspective. And I heard this from Prabhupada. Bhakti Sridhar Goswami Maharaj. He said there was a girl and she was pregnant. And it was soon that she was going to come into labor. So she went to bed at night and she told her mother that I'm going to go to sleep now. If I go into labor, be sure to wake me up. Mother said, you'll know when you go into labor. No one will have to tell you. You'll know it's happening. It will take over you and consume you entirely and so forth. So, better we focus on chanting Harinam purely, without any offense, attentively. Nam Chintamani means, Nam is like Chintamani stone, you can get whatever you want from it. But even though Thakur has called Nam Chintamani Swarup. So, Nam will give you your Swarup. You make a wish on Nam and focus on chanting purely. You have nothing to lose. Everything will come naturally, and you'll know it. At the same time, we should know some theory, and so we maybe become. And I think, as I say, my course of action is we follow my guru, and I have two gurus, so it's not trouble to know. So with regard to this, I follow Prabhupada. He's my guru, and so forth. And he's the most prominent influence in my life, and so on. So I do think that that is a little bit of a narrow kind of a presentation. Although there's some truth to it, as I've explained. We shouldn't use these things to intimidate others and to bolster our own ego, and these are very, very, very high topics. This is our ideal, to attain bhava. This is the fulfillment of a life of lifetimes of sadhana and so forth. We should have some interest in that, obviously, that ideal. We should have some patience and some sense also. What is that ideal? How extraordinary that is. And then we'll be encouraged where we are, just to be on the boat, so to speak. If you're on the boat and you know you're going to Sweta Dweep, that private island of God, you know, he's got his own private island there. What goes on there? We hear different rumors about that. So we got a ticket to get on the boat. We think we'll go there. And we're on the boat. And that's all. Stay on the boat. Gradually, at some point you'll see the island in the distance, and so forth. Sometimes you're on the boat and you think, I'm not seeing, are we going anywhere? I'm not sure. Stay on the boat. That's the idea. So, I think it's worth talking about these topics in this way, and it is more characteristic of the Bhakti Vinod Parivar, in my experience. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur wrote a poem. There's a series of verses in the poem, but the main verse that is highlighted, and it was particularly highlighted by Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj. It's engraved in his mouth in large letters, in stone. Pujalaragapata Gaurava Bange Matalavati Janakirtanarange. When they were building the marble temple, Gaudiya Math building the marble temple in Calcutta, when the time came and the temple was completed, to move the deity from the rented house to the temple, they made a palanquin and a kirtan, and they sang this song, in which this verse comes, Pujalaragapata Gaurava Bange Matala Hari Kirtanarange. And what they had been doing to build the marble temple was a big, expensive thing. Gaudiya Vaishnavism didn't have big marble temples like this in cities like Calcutta. They had some stone temples in the Dhams, like in Vrindavan, where the Goswamis got the patronage of kings centuries ago and so forth. In Navadvip, there were small structures. There was no yoga pith temple at Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's birthplace. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Bhaktivinoda Thakur did that. So anyway, Bhaktisiddhanta went to Calcutta to open a temple, a marble temple, big thing. And so his disciples were collecting money from people, and they were throwing it at the temple. And sometimes people would complain, this money could be going for a hospital, it could be going to feed people, and so forth. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, we will take the money and just throw it at the deity. The money represents all kinds of desires that people have. So we will take the money, which is not only symbolic of their desires, but is a manifestation of their desires by which they might fulfill them. Take that money and throw it at the deity. Build a marble temple and very opulent and so forth. This kind of opulence is not kind of characteristic of Vrindavan in a sense, because we know it's like I've been explaining the last few days, the village, the cowherd place, and so forth, the place of houses made of mud pies and cow dung and this kind of thing. Of course, sometimes it's spoken about with some language of Aishwarya to attract some people. So he had an idea like this: we build a marble temple, we throw all the money at this, and then my devotees, when they're collecting that money and throwing it at the temple for building the temple, they will think that we will empty out our hearts of all material desires in this way, and we will worship the Rag Marg. We will not say we are on the Rag Marg per se, but we are worshippers of that marg. So in the context of worshipping that marg, glorifying that, building the temple to announce it and so forth, there will come a time, and this is kirtan, through kirtan, preaching, which involved raising money from people and saying, give money for the temple, don't give money for the gift for yourself, give money for the temple. So this was their extended idea of kirtan. They would get out, go out and kirtan, and collect money door to door and so forth. And so this was all considered to be an exercise in glorifying the Rag Marg. It would install Radha and Krishna and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the temple. And the idea was that in the course of doing this, Gaurava Bhange, the reverence for that marg would be crossed over and one would enter into it. And so, Kirtana Prabhave Smarana Svabhavi, he said, by Kirtan, this will all be accomplished. Smaranam will be accomplished, internal meditation, very naturally, by the power of Kirtan in due course. So this was his method, and we tend to emphasize in that way and be very careful not to make something mundane out of such high ideals of Sakyarasa, Rasarasa, Manjari Bhava, and so forth. Once I talked to Pujapad Bhakti Pramod Puri Goswami Maharaj, godbrother of Prabhupada, who had considered Sridhar Maharaj as his Siksha Guru, like Prabhupada did also. And there was some propaganda similar to what you had heard and you asked about, that I was not comfortable with. Some persons were saying that if you want the Manjari Bhava, then you have to come over here, because Prabhupada is only in Sakyarasa. So some people were saying what some people were criticizing Sridhar Maharaj was saying when he wasn't saying that, as I explained earlier. So I had occasion to meet with Puri Goswami Maharaj, and I sang to him the song of Prabhupada that Prabhupada wrote on the boat, the Jaladuta. It's a very nice poem that Prabhupada wrote. And Prabhupada did not write it for publication. He was on the boat, and he didn't know at the time if he would make it to the other shore. He was sick and old. I think he had a heart attack on the boat. So he wrote a prayer, a poem called Prayer to Lord Krishna. And in the prayer, he prays to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur for the power to do the preaching that he was asked to do and so forth. And after praying in that way in Sharanagati, a beautiful example of Sharanagati, and praying for the power to be an instrument of the Guru for preaching and so forth, then he prays for his ideal. Also, that, and with that preaching completed and so forth, if you give me the power to do that, then I would like to enter into the Calvary fields. What is that verse?
I live to put the second line.
Yeah, he says, Tomar Milani Vai, Abar Sheshu Kopai, Kocharani Bleeding Bor. Kotavai, Kotavani Chuti Chuti, Vanikai, Luta Puti, say Dean Kotavari more. You just have to hear Chuta Chuti, Luta Puti, and you know what it is about. Chuta Chuti, Luta Puti. Say Dean Kotavari more. These are words of Sakyarasa. Rolling on the ground and frolicking in the forests and so forth. He says, Kocharani Puti, nay I. Oh my dear friend, oh my dear friend, when will I enter into the Sakyarasa with you? And all throughout the day, wandering in various forests of Vrindavan, herding cows and so forth. Say Deen Kovalamon, when will this day be mine? And praise like this. So, very nice poem. And he's not writing this for preaching or something. It wasn't a preaching strategy. He's writing in bhajan, his internal moments. He didn't even know if he would even reach the next shore. He wasn't thinking, and this will later be published in the book and so forth. We did publish it later on, and so forth. It's in the book, Oh My Friend, also. So, he expressed such sentiments. What was my point? And very clearly.
You were speaking about Puri Maharaj.
And Puri Goswami Maharaj, I read him the poem, and then of course when he heard that line, he said, "I is Sakyarasa." I said, and Maharaj, some people are now saying that because Prabhupada is in Sakyarasa, then problem. Because if you want to manjari bhava, you have to go somewhere else. And Puri Goswami Maharaj said to me, he said, Baba, he said, if you've got a guru situated in Sakyarasa, like your Guru Maharaj, and you think you've got a problem, then you've got a problem. He said, we should be so lucky to have such a guru. And he can make all arrangements. Who has that kind of access to Krishna Lila, he can make all arrangements to give you anything you could possibly desire. You haven't got to worry about that. So you see, this is some way of talking about these topics that indicates real spiritual understanding. Someone who has sakyarasa is not the limited person who can teach you what you need to know, or take you where you might need to go. It's not put you in the hands of a gopi and so forth. He can't do that. He's active there in that realm. Anybody who's active in that realm, who has connection there, we want connection with that. So this is a more substantial and spiritual way of thinking and speaking about these things, and it's a pity, it's a shame, it's a travesty really, that such topics will sometimes be reduced to a competitive spirit, and my guru is better than yours, type of thing. This is very, very, very extremely unbecoming. Does that help? Yes.
I have a question now.